Elijah Carter had long since grown used to the rhythm of early mornings, the kind where the world was still painted in dusky blue and the rooster's crow cut through the silence of sprawling farmland, a rhythm etched into his very bones from a childhood where every day began before the sun stretched its golden fingers across the sky, and though most people who saw him today would simply call him a farmer, a black man in dusty boots, faded jeans, a flannel shirt with sleeves rolled up to strong forearms, and a wide-brimmed straw hat. They never saw the deeper story, the decades of sweat, sacrifice, and strategy that had shaped him into far more than the weathered image he presented to the world, because Elijah Carter, despite appearances, was not just any farmer but one of the most successful agricultural businessmen in Georgia, owning not just thousands of acres of organic farmland but also trucking fleets, packaging facilities, and, through cleverly layered holding companies, investments in everything from real estate to aviation, a fact he deliberately kept close to his chest, because he had learned that people revealed their true nature not when they knew you were powerful but when they assumed you weren't, and today, on this particular morning, he was about to witness that truth play out once again in a way so blatant it would sear itself into the memory of everyone present. He had woken before dawn, tended to a few chores on his land with the same humility he had never abandoned despite his wealth, then showered, dressed plainly, and climbed into his gleaming black pickup truck for a drive into the city. He had acquired a new business recently, a private jet service shop near the municipal airport, and while the acquisition had been handled quietly through his corporate team, Elijah liked to visit his ventures personally, not with fanfare, not in a three-piece suit, but in the same clothes he had always worn, because for him it wasn't about appearances, it was about seeing who respected him for his humanity rather than the perception of his money. The drive into the city was smooth, the fields giving way to highways, and highways giving way to glass towers and busy intersections, and as he pulled up in front of the jet service shop, its polished glass facade gleaming under the mid-morning sun, Elijah parked his truck in a spot near the entrance and stepped out, boots crunching against the pavement. The shop was impressive at first glance: sleek signage, pristine lobby, the faint hum of jet engines in the distance as private planes taxied beyond the gates. Inside, men in tailored suits and women in pencil skirts and polished heels moved with hurried purpose, while mechanics in uniforms worked near the hangars, all part of a business that catered to elite clientele, CEOs, investors, entertainers, and anyone wealthy enough to own or charter a jet. Elijah took a step toward the glass doors, his intention simple: to introduce himself quietly, assess the staff, and get a feel for the operation, but he didn't make it more than a few feet before a tall, slim white man in a sharply tailored navy suit intercepted him. This was Mark Hensley, the floor manager, a man whose hair was slicked back with too much gel, whose Rolex glimmered each time he adjusted his cuff, and whose smile never quite reached his eyes, because behind that smile lay arrogance, a superiority complex Elijah recognized immediately, the kind that dismissed a man not by his achievements but by the dirt on his boots and the color of his skin. "Excuse me, sir," Mark said, stepping directly into Elijah's path with one arm outstretched to block him, his tone thick with condescension. "I think you're lost. This isn't a farm supply store, this is a jet service facility. We don't allow random walk-ins. This is for serious clients only." Elijah paused, tilting his head slightly, his eyes calm but sharp, and asked in his deep, steady voice, "And what makes you think I don't belong here?" Mark chuckled dryly, giving Elijah a slow once-over, his eyes lingering on the dust clinging to the edges of his jeans, the scuff marks on his boots, the weathered hat pulled low against the sun, before smirking. "Let's be honest, you don't exactly fit the profile of someone who owns or services jets. This is private property, and unless you've got an appointment or a very expensive plane parked out back, I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I call security. We can't have, well, let's just say we can't have distractions in a place like this." His voice carried loudly enough that a receptionist behind the counter raised her eyebrows and two mechanics lingering by the door glanced over, smirks tugging at their lips as though enjoying the spectacle. Elijah kept his composure, though the insult stung in the way such assumptions always did, not because they hurt his ego but because they reminded him of how often men like Mark reduced someone to a stereotype. "People like me," Elijah repeated softly, almost to himself, then looked Mark squarely in the eye and said, "You're making a mistake." Mark barked out a laugh, throwing his head back in exaggerated amusement. "A mistake? The only mistake would be letting you through that door and risk having you dirty up a place meant for actual clients. Why don't you go back to your tractor and leave the jet business to men who actually know money?" At that, a couple of chuckles rippled through the small crowd forming in the lobby, employees, and even a waiting customer entertained by the display, their assumptions aligning with Mark's arrogance. But Elijah didn't flinch. Instead, he took one deliberate step closer, his presence suddenly filling the space, his voice carrying across the room with a quiet authority that silenced every laugh. "I own this place." The words fell heavy, sharp, undeniable, and for a moment the entire lobby froze. The receptionist's mouth dropped open. The mechanics exchanged stunned glances. Even the customer in an expensive suit shifted awkwardly. Mark, however, blinked rapidly as if he hadn't heard correctly. You what?" he stammered, his smirk vanishing, replaced by confusion. Elijah reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document, thick with signatures and embossed seals, the official acquisition papers that bore the name of his holding company and, most importantly, his own signature at the bottom. He tossed them lightly onto the counter, the papers fanning out for everyone to see, then repeated in a voice that carried the weight of absolute truth, "I said I own this place." The silence was deafening. One by one, eyes darted to the papers, then back to Elijah, the reality dawning on them like a thunderclap. The arrogant manager's face drained of color, his jaw working soundlessly as sweat began to bead at his temples. "Sir, I had no idea, I thought," he stuttered, his words tripping over each other. Elijah cut him off with a slow shake of his head, his voice calm but firm, heavy with disappointment. "I know exactly what you thought. And that's the problem. You judged me before you knew a thing about me. You saw boots and skin, and you assumed I was beneath you. Now here you are, exposed." The room remained hushed, all eyes on the confrontation, the atmosphere charged with the weight of the moment. Elijah let the silence linger, then turned his gaze to the gathered staff and customers. "Let this be a lesson," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Never measure a man's worth by the dirt on his clothes or the color of his skin. You might just find yourself working for him." His words struck like a gavel, final and undeniable. Then, slowly, he turned back to Mark, who stood trembling, his once arrogant posture now wilted. "You're fired," Elijah declared simply, the words falling like a hammer. Mark's eyes widened, his mouth opening in protest. "Please, sir, I didn't mean, I'll do better, I'll change," he pleaded, desperation clawing at his tone, but Elijah's decision was already sealed. "Collect your things and leave," he said, voice resolute. The dismissal rang through the air, final and absolute. With humiliation painted across his face, Mark gathered his belongings, the weight of every eye in the lobby on him as he slunk out, his once proud strides reduced to a defeated shuffle. The moment he was gone, Elijah turned back to the staff, his expression softening as he approached the receptionist, extending his hand warmly. "Why don't we start fresh?" he said with a faint smile. "Tell me your name, and let's talk about how we're going to make this place better together." The shift in energy was palpable. Employees straightened their backs, respect replacing skepticism, admiration replacing doubt. In that moment, Elijah wasn't just a farmer or an owner, he was a leader, a man who had proven with unshakable dignity that power wasn't in how loudly you boasted but in how calmly you commanded respect when it was denied. And as the whispers spread through the room, as everyone absorbed what they had just witnessed, one truth settled over them like a shadow they would never forget: the day the black farmer walked in, underestimated, and revealed himself as the owner with 5 simple words: "I own this place."